Hey guys, Kenny again doing another benchmark with the RTX 4080 and the 5900X at 3440 by 1440 ultra wide. We're going to do a little Red Dead video. This time we're going to do a comparison between Vulkan and DirectX 12. All the other settings will be the same. We'll go over those really quick before I get into the benchmarks. Just to show you guys real quick, we got the RTX 4080 with the 531.41 driver and the 5900X. So we'll get into the settings real quick and I'll show you guys the settings that I used. I used the in-game benchmark just to show you guys the averages. And so in the benchmark, I actually did full screen on both of them. So I basically set this to max, just super simple setting, and I just let it set everything at its usual settings. The particle quality we can turn up, but I just basically just set it so that this was preset to ultra basically, and then went down and set all these, but basically locked it and set it to DirectX12 and then Vulkan. So the only difference between the two benchmarks is just the API, the Vulkan or DirectX12. So we'll get into the benchmarks and I'll let you guys see the differences side by side, and then also have a couple screenshots there side by side so you guys can pause the video and check it out and see what you think. See if you can spot any differences at all in the benchmarks and the screenshots as far as how the game looks and also obvious performance. But that's it. I'll get into the benchmarks. So here we are getting into some benchmarks side by side. You can see on the left the DirectX 12 and Vulkan on the right. So as the benchmark goes along, you can kind of see some differences between the two. And when I was doing these benchmarks, I was kind of having a hard time telling the difference as far as the look of the game. I know there are some subtle differences, but I think both look pretty good. I also noticed that the difference is in GPU usage. Now, DirectX 12 might be a little bit harder on the GPU. Um, and you can tell in some spots, like right here, for instance, you can see like a 10 FPS difference. So there's definitely a good amount of difference. You can also see that the CPU usage is slightly different between the two as well. I noticed in game that like the Vulkan was a little bit harder on the CPU, but it seemed to have better FPS, and then the DirectX 12 was a little harder on the GPU. So it's kind of funny how different they work. But you can see right here, this is like a 40 FPS difference. It's kind of crazy. And they look pretty similar. I was also interested to see the RAM usage difference between Vulkan and DirectX 12. Um, you can see here we're using about 1.3 gigs of RAM on Vulkan and 1.25 on DirectX 12, so there's a little bit of a difference there. As far as the way it looks though, I feel like they're pretty dang close. They both look really good. Um, we're about halfway through the benchmark here. I can't really tell that big of a difference. I think they both look great. I mean, the settings overall are the same, just a different graphics API. So overall, though, I think either way, it's good to go. I definitely want to do this same test on a different GPU, and maybe even try it on my laptop that has a 1660 Ti and see what the difference is. Because for the most part, it looks like running Vulkan can get you a few extra FPS, and this is kind of on the higher end. Like we're in the mostly in the hundreds the whole time, so 5 FPS or so doesn't really matter. But it could potentially matter with a different GPU. So I'm going to do some more testing and see if switching the two graphics APIs makes a difference down when you're in like 30s or 40s or so. Now I know that these benchmarks can be a couple of FPS off here and there between even keeping the same settings. So we'll see our averages here in a second, and we'll be able to compare. I do think that the highs are a little bit more in Vulkan, and the average might be just a tiny bit higher. But just kind of looking at the benchmark side by side, it's kind of hard to tell, especially when you're in game playing. Um, the differences I think are pretty subtle. Obvious performance differences though. You could see like the CPU temp was just a little higher on Vulkan. So DirectX12 average of 120 and Vulkan 125, a maximum of 170 in Vulkan and about 160 in DirectX. So there are some differences. See, looking at these two pictures here, they look really similar. Same with Valentine. I don't know. You guys can pause the video and check it out and see what you think. Let me know in the comments.